Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Daydream Nation, and I've got Pete Jones back to the Deep Purple series. How are you, Pete?
Well, Mr. Kerr, great to see you. Ready for some more exciting conversations about some great albums.
Absolutely. Now, we are going to go for the big kahuna. This is ranking the 10 favorite Deep Purple and Deep Purple family albums. So it could be Deep Purple, it could be Whitesnake, Rainbow, Gillan, Hughes for All, Glenn Hughes, studio albums.
Right.
Pete, what an exercise. I've been racking my brains over the last couple of weeks.
I got extra sleep intentionally.
Absolutely. So without further ado, let's start with your number 10. We're going to just go one by one, 10 to 1. Over to you.
Okay. We're going to start 1980, released in May. This is from a band that I absolutely love. And this is an album that is a heavy, heavy rotation. And we're going to go with Ready and Willin' from Whitesnake. It's my favorite lineup of the band. The tunes on here are spectacular. Everything is just great from strength to strength. There's good heavy rockers. There's good blues tunes. There's a good ballad in there. It's just, the band is on fire. It's an exceptional recording, and everything sounds great. And of course, this material really sounded great on the live album that we talked about on our last series. Go check that out, folks. Like and subscribe. And it's a really strong record. And this is going to start off my list of really dear and true to my heart albums. So 1980, Ready and Willing from Whitesnake.
Absolutely. What a start. What a start. Pete, just a question to you. Did that get any radio airplay in Chicago in 1980? Did you hear any of those tracks?
Fool for Your Lovin', I think, was on only for a little bit, but we really rediscovered it on the live record. And but I don't remember any of the other ones. Most of these at the time, the studio records, were imports.
Yep.
You had to hunt these up. And so they were not mainstream, and they were not under main release in the US for quite a while.
Until the success of 1987, which was a completely different band, and Geffen reissued a lot of those older albums. But I'm always interested to hear, was there any... No. I've done a few shows with Tim Derling of Canada, and much the same. He said there was just like nothing. So
no, it was kind of our little secret. And most people did not know that Coverdale was out there with a band, and especially that had other Deep Purple members in it. And you just kind of brought your friends along as you could when you could get them over for listening parties and listening sessions. You're like, hey, you got to check this out. Go borrow this and let me know what you think. That's really the only way we could spread it around. So
absolutely. All right. Fantastic. That's a great start to the show. Right. Well, my number 10 is from 1981, and this is Gillan and Future Shock. Now, I love this album, and I love Gillan. I think Gillan, out of all the Deep Purple offshoot bands, is the most experimental. They do a jam. The songs are very loose, maybe ramshackle. This album's kind of got a little bit of Little Richard, a little bit of old rock and roll, but a little bit of punk flair. The reason why I like this album so much is the guitar work of Bernie Tormé. He is so underrated. He was kind of a cross between a Jimi Hendrix, and he was sort of this sort of Irish firebrand.
Little Rory Gallagher in him.
Yeah, absolutely. But the songs on this album, Future Shock, No Laughing in Heaven, which has got a lot of social observational lyrics from Ian Gillan, Bite the Bullet, New Orleans, which, you know, is really sort of telegraphing his love of Little Richard and that old type 50s rock and roll. Yeah, look, I would have loved to have seen Gillan in the day, because I think it would be one of those bands where anything would go. It's not structured, and it was kind of very loose. And I'll say it again, it's kind of the most punkish out of the Deep Purple family. They pushed the boundaries. Gillan applied in 1978 or 77 to all these different record companies to get a deal. And some of the responses he got back were quite rude, saying, Gillan, ha, 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 you know. And it was Richard Branson and the Virgin label
Virgin,
that
yeah.
took a punt on Ian Gillan. And this album went top 10. It actually, a lot of these albums with the Gillan band, sort of charted very high. So he was right up competing with the Rainbows and the Whitesnake. So we didn't have Deep Purple in the early 80s, Pete, but we had the Offshoot Children, and they were really flying the flag. But I love this, Future Shock. It's probably my favorite out of the Gillan albums. And
it shows that his vocals are so versatile. He can really kind of sing anything.
Absolutely. And also honorable mention to John McCoy on bass, Mick Underwood on drums, fine drummer, and also the great Colin Towns on keyboard. It's very hard to pin the sound because it's got a bit of jazz, got a bit of metal, a bit of punk, a bit of rockabilly. It's got it all. So if you like that, Gillan, Future Shock.
It's a great
number
album.
10.
Great album. All right. Number 9. And this one is going to just kind of dovetail off the other one, released April 1981. And I go to the next release. We're going to Come and Get It from Whitesnake. And this is just a great, great, great record. And the title track, Come and Get It, the burning hot stuff, Don't Break My Heart Again, easily is one of their, this is way before, Here I Go Again and stuff like that, folks. This is where it started, and this is where those origins of those kinds of songs. Lonely Days, Lonely Nights, love it. And then it's just kind of similar to some of the inner tracks on like Burn, like Might Just Take Your Life or something like that. Or What's Going On Here, Wine, Women, and Song, Child of Babylon is great. He starts to get a little tongue-in-cheeky lyrically down the road, which doesn't age as well, but the music is great. The recording is outstanding. Everything sounds great. And again, this is kind of an end of an era. They were totally kind of different after this. But those two records, Ready and Willin' and Come and Get It, that's my Whitesnake. And that's where I wrap myself around them. And those are, the areas where I go to when I'm really in the mood for some really just great, simple, straightforward rock and roll, which is really what this is. So both of these albums are really strong. It's hard to kind of pick one over the other. But I like the flow of Come and Get It. So I moved that one ahead of Ready and Willin'. So
nice. And folks, you'll be hearing more about that later. That album actually hit number 2 in the UK charts, and it didn't get the number 1 because it was held back by a band called Adam and the Ants.
Adam and the Ants, yes.
Wonder what happened to them. Anyway,
don't drink, don't smoke.
Yeah. My number 9 album is a concept album of sorts, and it's Phenomena. So, which came out, I believe, in 84. Glenn Hughes did all the lead vocals. This was the project of Tom Galley, brother of Mel, and it was sort of like an all-star cast. You had Neil Murray on bass, you had the great Cozy Powell on drums. The concept, I won't describe it. It's a very convoluted story, but it's all supernatural and the occult. The music itself, it's kind of a little bit of synth pop, but there's a lot of guitar crunch to it. And I tell you what, Glenn Hughes, the reason why I put this at number 9, it's one of the great vocal performances of Glenn. He is singing his ass off. Just vocally, he's just outer-worldly. So you're not really familiar with this album, are you, Pete?
No, I'm aware of the members, and it's on one of my lists. Of things to check out. I mean, certainly when you've got that kind of lineup and those kinds of players.
I'm trying to get it into focus, but they've got a little thing in the CD, and it's like the Deep Purple family that's connected into Phenomenon. But oh, look, it's a great album. Kiss of Fire, Still the Night, which I think was a demo that may have been introduced to the band by Mel Galley. Mel Galley, I'm sorry, I should say that. He's associated with this project as well. Who's Watching You, Still the Night. And you listen to a lot of these, the melodies on this album, and there's sort of some echoes of some melodies that were on Slide It In from Whitesnake. So you
Oh,
sort of
okay.
think, okay, this is where the genesis of some of these songs came into the Mel Galley songwriting on Slide It In. But it's a
Right.
great project. And the reason why I put this in my top 10 is because Glenn Hughes' vocals are just outerworldly. And I just think this is one of his greatest vocal performances. And I've got to put Glenn in the top 10 somewhere. So check it out.
Excellent. I got to put that one again further up the list. Let's go with number 8, and this just falls into my favorite band. And anybody who's watched, it's not any surprise. So this is 1971, and I'm going back to a spectacular album, Fireball. And there's so much great stuff on this. And, you know, we'll talk about other albums on my list as we go along, but there's just something about this that is, it's kind of like a flyover. There's kind of the one before and the one after, and this one kind of has a tendency to get a bit overlooked, and maybe I'm kind of doing that myself, ranking it down. But you know, there's some really great things on here. Obviously, Fireball was, I mean, it's prototype everything. I mean, you know, Pacey's double bass work. Of course, the fun story is that he had tried to do it with one bass drum, and he could get the speed, but there was no power. I mean, just the fact that he could do it that fast with one foot is already mind-boggling. But over in the corner from an earlier session was Keith Moon's drums. So he just pilfered one of Keith's bass drums, fired the thing up, and fired up the air conditioning unit. And off he goes with one of the great drum intros of any era into something that just had never been done before. Sabbath and Zeppelin never played with this kind of speed. And I always say that Deep Purple was the band of propulsion. They were the forward. It was momentum. It was drive. It was go, go, go. And that was kind of their calling card. And that really hit home with me. The inner tracks on this are very overlooked. Demon's Eye is great. I love Anyone's Daughter. Sorry, folks, if you don't like it, tough cookies. I love it. I think it's fun, tongue-in-cheek, and Gillan is perfect for it. The Mule, it's different without the drum solo, of course. It's very psychedelic, but it's the last 2 tracks, Fools and No One Came, that are just ridiculously, crushingly heavy. And it is just riff after riff after pound. And I think it's just a really great record. And this is a really fun memory for me because in junior high in 76, sorry, let me get my years right, I used to bring records all the time to school. And during my lunch hour, we would get a bunch of us into the library and we would daisy chain as many headphones as we could from these record players whose tone arms weighed 6,000 pounds, you know, those old industrial things. This was the first album I brought from home, and there's like 12 of us, all with open-eared headphones with every volume selector on as loud as it could go. And we're all getting whacked in the back of the head because Speed King was blasting through the library. So this is always a great memory. I just think it's a really great record. I think Gillan's vocals on this are really strong. And the band sounds really great. It's a good, solid recording, and it's always worth a revisit and to maybe kind of give this one a little more love. Covers not that great, but it gets your attention, but the songs deliver in spades. So number 8 is Deep Purple's Fireball.
Yeah, that's a great album. It does get overlooked because it's probably in the shadow within rock, or it's wedged between in rock and Machine Head. So
Right.
Blackmore's guitar playing, very experimental, a lot of harmonics, and I love the light and shade. And folks, if Deep Purple actually swings on quite a few of these songs, they've got groove. Demon's Eye, that's a prime example how Deep Purple's got groove. They're not 4 on the floor; they've actually swing.
Oh yeah, it is legitimately swinging. Absolutely,
yeah, absolutely. All right, Pete, this is where I get a little bit controversial. So I might get a bit of
Hey, bring
stick for
it.
this, but I've got to sort of say what I've got to say. My number eight is Deep Purple in rock.
Okay.
I put it a little bit lower. It's because I don't play it as much. There are some in the catalog that are more dearer and to my heart than in rock, but
Mhm.
I appreciate the historical relevance. So it's a very influential album. It's groundbreaking. I mean, Speed King is one of my all-time favorite Deep Purple songs. It's just so crushingly heavy, and the virtuosity of pace. Roger Glover and John Lord and Blackmore, they're firing on all cylinders. I think
Yeah.
that if I had to sort of be cornered and say what song summarizes the virtuosity of this band, it'd be a toss up between Child in Time and Speaking. Child in Time, what a magnificent song. That is a vocal masterclass of Ian Gillan. And poor bloody Richie Blackmore taunting him in the later tours and, let's play Child in Time. It is such a masterclass for anybody vocally, isn't it, Pete?
Oh,
If
well,
you
no
want to get,
question.
if you want to test your chops, try singing Speed King, but try singing Child in Time. But there's only one Ian Gillan, and
Absolutely.
the way he does those banshee shrieks, it brings a shiver up your spine. Um, this album probably introduced Gallop Rock. There'd be no
Hmm.
UFO. There'd be no Iron Maiden. Dun, 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 dun,
Right.
sort of Bloodsucker, Flight of the Rat, Hard Loving Man. It's a groundbreaker, but it's number eight in my top 10 simply because there are other Purple albums that I hold more, have a more of a sentimental attachment and a bit closer to my heart. But I do appreciate the historical significance, and it's one of the holy scriptures of rock. And I love that album cover. You
That
know,
is really good.
how many bands have copied that?
Yeah.
So yeah,
Great
that's
choice.
top tier
Great
Deep
choice.
Purple, and I'm sure. Got a funny feeling I'll probably see more of it coming up.
Hmm.
Maybe.
Perhaps.
Just a hunch.
TBD. To number seven. And we're going to jump to another band. And this is another album, like my previous one, that has a tendency to be kind of overlooked. And that is a horrible mistake. Long Live Rock and Roll by Rainbow. Again, it's living in the shadow of a more successful or more well known older brother, so to speak. This stands all on its own to me. This is a really great record. The opening track is great, obviously. Long Live. I love Lady of the Lake. The whole feel of it is great. People have a tendency to kind of be a little bit down on some of the inner tracks, like LA Connection. I love it. I love the heaviness of it. Ronnie is strong as heck. It's got a great feel to it. Gates of Babylon. Are we kidding? I mean, if there had never been a Stargazer, we'd be talking about this one because this is an epic. All things that Richie is known for, the whole neoclassic is, classical approach to everything is just here in spades. I mean, and what a feel from Cozy. Ah, and when they break it down into the halftime section with the phase shifter, ah, and then it kicks right back in, and Ronnie is just amazing on it. And I will say this: if you haven't paid attention, check out the video on YouTube to Gates of Babylon. And the reason I say that is there's something fun and unique that happens on that. The band is miming, so they're not important. Ronnie is singing live. And holy crap, is he crushing it. It is so fluid and strong and effortless. And the way they recorded it, there's just enough delay in his voice in the ambience of the room that just makes it sound enormous. That video is a gem. And of course, we also get Kill the King. I mean, are you kidding? And then maybe one of the heaviest tracks they've ever done is The Shed. This is just, you can just see Cozy. Bam, 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 da, 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 and just, oh. And Ronnie cuts over the top of it. I like Sensitive to Light. I've always liked it. And you know what? Rainbow Eyes is what it is. Is it performed well? Does Ronnie sing well? Yes. It would be one thing if the song was different and he didn't sing it well. You'd be like, well, that just didn't fit. It's Ronnie. This whole album is really good. A little bit suspect here and there, recording-wise. It's a bit murky, a little bit muddy. The low end is a little bit absent. But that's what your tone controls are for, folks, or your EQs. Just fix that a little bit and add some more of that little punch. Then the album just will come to life for you. It's such a great album, 1978, and that is also a wicked cover.
Yes.
And long live rock and roll. And what, God, that logo is so cool. So cool.
I really like that album, and I think it's just a shame that lineup didn't continue on.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was, I mean, folks, look at live in 77 Munich. They were on fire. A really, really crack band.
Yeah.
But Rainbow Eyes, when I first heard that song, I was waiting for it to build up like a Stairway to Heaven, but it never comes. Did you?
Nope.
Was that your first reaction when you heard Rainbow Eyes? You were expecting it was going to be like a little bit of not a power ballad, but it was going to build up into something, but it never happened.
By the time it got to the chorus after the second verse, I thought, it's not going anywhere. But it just is one of those ones that probably at the time, at 16 years old, 78, 62 to 78, that works right. It probably went a little bit over my head, orchestration wise and that kind of thing. But it didn't take long as I was maturing as a musician to go back to it and go, this is really cool. This is really good. And it's really got merits on its own. And I loved the light and shade on it. I loved the contrast on it. And they did exactly the right thing. They ended the record with it. You put it in the middle of the record, it kills the flow.
Yes.
And so I think it was a great decision, put it right where it was. And I was more than happy with it. And now I play it all the way straight through. There's no skipping any tracks on this album.
Absolutely.
Well, almost any of these, I'm not skipping anything. So
yeah. A what if question. So Richie wanted to change the direction of the band and become a little bit more AOR or get his, as he would say, songs played on radio, become more commercial. So you had Down to Earth, and then you had the Joe Lynn Turner years. Imagine if they continued the same neoclassical swords and sorcery path of Dio. Dio had some success with that sort of imagery with Black Sabbath, in Heaven and Hell, Mob Rules, and had a fair amount of success with Vivian Campbell with those first two Dio albums. Yep. So do you think if Blackers had continued that in that direction, the world would have just caught up with Rainbow and they would have been a bit of a draw card in America? What do you think?
I think Richie Post Purple is a story of good idea, wrong timing. So much of it was he had the right band, he had the right songs, but by 77, 78, this stuff was not what people were listening to. A couple of years later, you can throw it in when Maiden's being more experimental and they're making longer epic kind of tracks and Dio was doing his stuff. I mean, if you would have played Down to Earth in 1977, 1978, totally different earlier, maybe a different story. It's all bad timing for him. And
I agree. I agree, Pete. If you flip it around, so when he was doing the AOR albums, instead of doing it in that period of 81 to 84, where he's chasing the Journeys and the Foreigners, if he did
Right.
that in the late 70s, and that sort of sound, the California West Coast sound, was being played a lot on radio, and he was battling those types of folk, it may have had more successful. Then the early 80s, he does the
Let me
swords and sorcery.
let me suggest this to you, sir. Instead of doing Burn, I know it means Burn doesn't exist, folks. Don't kill me. Right after he leaves Purple is when he starts the Rainbow Train. I see a parallel with what happened with Kansas. You build and build up to 75, 76, 77 when Left Overture and Point of No Return. And now you're into Long Live Rock and Roll, but with people who were familiar with you through that middle part of the 70s. I think that's a different story as well, because for him to just throw it out there, the debut was what it was, and 76 was kind of an apex year, 76, 77, but those were apexes for bands like Aerosmith and Kiss and all those who had started years earlier. They had to have the momentum. They had to have the trajectory. Rainbow didn't have that. It was just all of a sudden, here it is. And then by the time we got to here, it's already tapering off. And again, bad timing.
Starting over was kind of tough. You can't expect to transfer from Purple to Rainbow and bring the audience with you. He probably lost a considerable amount of the audience, or at least half of the audience. I'm just saying that.
Look how long it took Whitesnake.
Years, absolutely.
Yeah.
Who, in reality, sold more records than Deep Purple. Get that round your head, folks. Deep Purple have never done an album that has sold as much as 1987. But you think of Deep Purple, heritage band, one of the four holy fathers of hard rock, and Whitesnake, has sold so many more copies.
It only takes one big monster one like that to do that.
Absolutely. Anyway, I love the what ifs, Pete. There's always these what if they go in this direction or that direction. But I agree. It's sort of like he was just missed, like, Maxwell Smart missed it by that much.
Well, I just remember the day I saw it. It was one of the most disappointing days of my musical life. I went into the record store, saw the new album, saw the album cover, and I'm like, well, that's weird. The logo's a bit different. I'm like, that's weird. I turn it over. Who's Graham Bonnet? I'm like, there's no Ronnie. And I had tickets on my birthday, October 79, to see Rainbow open for Blue Oyster Cult. And
what a lineup. I mean, you just look at it on paper. That looks great.
Show for another day, other than getting to see Cozy finally. It was one of the worst shows I've ever seen in my life. We'll talk about it another time. Yeah. Blue Oyster Cult just wiped them. And I was just like, 1, 2 or too late. So talk about bad timing.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, back to the top 10. That was a nice little diversion. I'm going to go to number 7, which you have covered previously, and this is the 1980 album, Ready and Willing. I love this album. Coverdale's vocals are at the absolute peak. He's got that wonderful bluesy tone. This is the tone that Ritchie Blackmore fell in love with to bring him into Purple, or John Lord when he heard that audition tape. It's kind of got that wonderful, it's in the same ballpark as Paul Rodgers. There's a little bit of Joe Cocker. There's a little bit of everything, but it's just so wonderfully bluesy. And there's just so much emotion. This is where the production started to catch up with Whitesnake, because those first 2 albums, there's some good songwriting, but the production is like Martin Birch is probably having a cup of tea. Trouble and Love Hunter. It's kind of a little bit muffly, and it just doesn't have the crystal clear production that Ready and Willing have. Fool for Your Loving, that's just a classic Whitesnake song. Don't accept any substitute. I'm not talking about that woeful 1989 travesty, but this is the one that has a lot of emotion, and you've got the wonderful tone of Bernie Marsden. Marsden and Moody, what a combination. David
really
Coverdale,
play well together.
did they ever? David Coverdale said that he didn't want guitar heroes. He wanted somebody that played well within the confines of a band. He always had in his head that he wanted a band that was based loosely on the Allman Brothers. Mm-hmm. And he had a fantastic combination. You had Moody with that wonderful slide guitar, and Bernie Marsden, that beautiful tonality. I mean, B.B. King actually said some very complimentary things, that said out of all the blues guitarists that Bernie Marsden had an absolute wonderful tone. Mm-hmm. Ready and Willing, Carry Your Load, Blind Man. I mean, some of the lyric writing can be looked at 2024. It's a little sexist, but I sort of take it that it's tongue-in-cheek. But this is where it shows the possibilities of what this band could be and could have been if David wanted to go down that road. I think it's one of the finest British blues albums of all time, and there's just so much emotion. And where you hear somebody sing and it actually stirs your soul and you believe in what he's singing, well, the job's done. Whitesnake, Ready and Willing, a deserved top 10, and this is where they started to get the success in England that they so richly deserved, because it's just good songs, and they had a really good series of musicians in that band. Chemistry. You can't deny chemistry.
Number of years ago, I asked my wife, because she is a fan of books on tape, and I asked her, I said, if you could have anybody you wanted read something to you, who would you want? And she goes, David Coverdale.
Yes.
And I'm like, there it is.
There's a book for you.
There it is.
I should write to him. I'd love him to, like some of those books, get him to read that.
What a glorious.
I think your wife is onto something there, mate.
I said, you're right. I'm with you. Not a problem. Yeah. So that's number 6. We're gonna stay in the family, and we're gonna go to an album that continually kind of keeps sliding up my list. It's never far from this spot. But, I'm going to go with 1973. I'm going with Who Do You Think We Are? Who do we think we are? This is another one that just somehow people just say, oh, it's the last one with Gillan. It's not that great. It's not. Whoa. Wrong. In my opinion, this is a tremendous record. First of all, it might be of the 4 the best sounding. I think the band is recorded beautifully on this. Sure, there's the single "Woman from Tokyo." I think it's a great song, and of course, once you can not hear it edited, like it chopped up on the radio back in the day, you can hear the whole thing. It's much more enjoyable. But then this thing kind of takes off, and when you run a stretch of songs from Mary Long to Super Trooper, Smooth Dancer, Rat Bat Blue, and Place in Line, holy smokes. Every one of those is a flamethrower. They're just great. And they're heavy and they're riffy and rich, and they're just doing all these unison runs and lines. And Pacey's feel on something like Rat Bat Blue. I mean, just
swings.
In the verses, he's playing open snare drum. And then he goes to the hats. And Gillan, for someone who was on his way out or whatever, he's on fire on this. And his vocalizing, his vocals on Mary Long are just stupendous. And he's got an edge to him, and he's got an aggressiveness to him. His tone is just perfect. He's in total prime here. And this is one of those tales that you were talking about, Pete, with Rainbow. All of the guys have said, well, not Richie excluded, mostly Lord and Pacey, and they talked about it a lot. This breakup should have never happened. They were burnt out. They were completely overused. They had just gone tour, album, album, tour. I mean, just non-stop. Excuse me. And they were afraid, absolutely afraid. And when your personalities are always a bit on edge naturally, because we know Blackies and Ian didn't see eye to eye on most things. Well, when your patients are gone and you're exhausted and you just want to go home for a little bit, well, those things are magnified just tenfold and you just can't coexist. And Gillan's just like, see ya. And it never should have happened.
Yep.
Give him a break. Give him 6 months, 8 months. Freak. Take the year off. Who cares?
Yep.
Regroup, come back, and fire off something else. Because they were that good together. And it's a real shame in the annals of rock tales that this was kind of the end of it. And I know they got back together and we've done shows again. Check those out, folks. That you can't regain that many decades later what was going on here. And this was something really, it was only 73. They could have easily gone into 74, 75, and even if they finished at 75 or 76, another couple albums would have been really amazing.
Yeah.
So I love this record, and it just keeps getting better. There's not a bad song on here. Even I love Our Lady as well, and it's a great swan song. If that's the last of that era, it sure ends on a high note with me, because I never felt like listening to this going, someone's just going through the motions, because that's not how I hear it. So, and that's kind of a cool cover, and I liked the inside with all the quotes. And all the news clippings. And I think my favorite one of all time is John Lord says, yeah, I think my organ has a hell of a lot to do with how Deep Purple sounds. That's my favorite, because you're darn right, Mr. Lord. You are darn right. So,
a couple of takeouts. Martin Birch's production on that album is top notch. It's just pristine.
Love him. Love it.
Ian Gillan. I think the biggest travesty was after 73, he went MIA in rock for quite some time. I know that he bought a hotel, lost a lot of cash. Then he was sort of dabbling in this sort of pseudo jazzy albums with the Ian Gillan band. They redid Child in Time. Just between the years of 74 to maybe 78, it was like Ian Gillan MIA, and in rock world, that's kind of a long time.
Yeah,
and
it is.
It's, he had so much to give because he was such a talented and wonderful vocalist. And I think that's just sort of such a shame that in that period in the 70s, he was kind of a little bit MIA. Another takeout is if Deep Purple had a ballsy, aggressive, take no prisoners manager like Peter Grant,
yes,
they could have been Led Zeppelin, Conquer the World, Golden Gods, because I don't think Peter Grant would have allowed Led Zeppelin to make 3 albums or 2 albums. There was a thing in the 70s where you had a lot of bands pumping out 2 to 3 albums a year. Uriah Heep.
Yeah, good grief. Yeah.
In a short space of time, 5 albums. It's ridiculous. And so it's such a fractious story, the Uriah Heep, where band members have got substance abuse or leaving, and you wonder why, because they're just pushed to exhaustion. Thin Lizzy, they still had a couple of albums every year. Deep Purple, Peter Grant, Led Zeppelin, 1 every year. I think it was very well structured. If they had a manager like a Peter Grant, it may have been a different story. What do you think, Pete?
Well, look, Warner's and EMI and everybody who was all part of the machine. When you mentioned that, Grant could have made him Led Zeppelin, well, we have to remember that in 72/73, they were the biggest selling band on the planet. And, they were enormous. And the pressure gets to you after a while. And we're not talking about a band that broke up because of substances or those kinds of tragedies. These were personalities about people who were just incapable of coexisting in the same space anymore. Even the people we care for the most, I don't want them in my back pocket 24/7 for 4 or 5 years straight.
Mm.
You're looking 68 to 73, late 68, and that's just a lot.
Yep.
And especially back then, the way touring is not like it is today. It was way more grueling and more raw and harder. You were in shady stuff. Now, they had their own plane at some point, mostly Mark III, got their plane. But it was a grind. A lot of one-nighters, like days and days in a row, no days off. It's just, and they didn't have great PA systems. Gillan, I don't even know how he ever even heard himself sing any night at all when the band's 117 decibels on stage. I don't know how you even hear yourself to sing. You'd come off like you'd just gone 12 rounds with Tyson.
Yep.
You'd be exhausted, just beat to death.
Yep.
And it just wears and just wears and wears. And, he did kind of just, where did he go? And it was just like, where is Ian Gillan?
Yeah. And I mean, even the Gillan band didn't really get much traction in America. It was only probably coming to the American consciousness with Born Again, the tour. Oh yeah. Ian Gillan.
Very few people had a clue that there was even an Ian Gillan band and Gillan. They had no idea there was even a distinction.
Yep.
No.
Yep.
Those were all imports as well. And if you didn't know what to look for, you had no idea. You weren't going to find.
Absolutely. But he was highly revered in Europe and UK. He still had a bit of a presence in the UK and they knew who he was. Plus, he was the original Jesus in Jesus Christ Superstar. So that's an extra kudos. But yeah, another interesting what if. So, all right. My turn. I'm going to number 6, the Hughes and Froll. Glenn Hughes, Pat Froll, what a lineup. This is an album that should have been huge. And this is another rare example of Glenn Hughes where his vocals are outerworldly. I Got Your Number, Muscle and Blood.
Muscle and Blood, yeah.
Coast to Coast, an old trapeze song. The playing on this album is just top-notch. Had the drummer from Quiet Riot, Frankie Banali, he played. Basically these two. They only did a once an album. There's always been a demand to do a follow-up, but they've never, it's never come to fruition. Produced by the great Andy John.
Pat's kind of disappeared. I have no idea where Pat Thrall is.
They never did a tour. I think they did a limited tour with Santana. It was only like 20 dates. There was minimal play on MTV and it sunk with a stone. However, this album sort of got a bit of a reputation where musos would be talking about it in Kerrang magazine or trade papers. And through word of mouth, the legend has grown. And look, I'm going to be seeing Glenn Hughes and for a meet and greet. This is the album that I'll get the pen and ask him to sign because it's one of my favorites. Where Did the Time Go? Who Will You Run To? First Step of Love. Just the vocals. It's a drug album, though. Look at their eyes. They're just poked out of it. And it's just one of those things where you think that there's so much substance abuse going, but they can still get some artistry out and produce something that's just so majestic and so wonderful. It's kind of against the odds, but the drugs did get in the end because they didn't probably have the will and the motivation to push it to the next level. And that's why this
Right.
album's sunk like a stone. So, do you have any recollections of Hughes and Fall in the Day, Pete?
I remember hearing about it, but I never explored it. I mentioned the live album on our last show, and that I love, and he had played Muscle off of that one. But it was one of those ones that it was kind of, I knew it was there, but really hadn't explored it yet. Glenn's whole catalog is something that's is a deep dive journey that I have to put in order and appropriately give it the respect that it deserves, to not just gloss over some stuff, but give it a good Pete Jones deep dive and go through it and really appreciate it for what it is. And I've got to find the right kind of time to do that.
Absolutely. All right, Pete, what's the next pick?
Right. Well, this to me is the apex for this particular band. And I will make sure to draw my very clear distinction here. Released in 1984, and another Martin Birch spectacular, especially on this. We've got Slide It In, but folks, this is the UK version. I'm not dealing with the US one at all. I don't care for it. I don't like it. I don't listen to it. So sorry, you John Sykes people, different channel, because I don't care. I don't care for it. This is stunning. And the lineup with Powell and Hodkinson on bass, but we've got Mel and Mickey Moody, and they just play perfectly together. And the sound on this is so huge. Cozy's drums are my favorite of his entire catalog on this record, the way his drums sound. His bass drum, you can hear the head almost vibrating. It's so clean. It's got so much depth. And it's like the drum is just, big like that Hall & Oates video, dance on your knees, bang, bang, bang. It's every track on here is exceptional. Gambler, of course, this is the UK order. So Gambler, Slide It In, Standing in the Shadow, killer track. Give Me More Time, awesome, without the overall pick scrapes and the nasty noise distortion crap that Sykes puts all over it. The version of Love Ain't No Stranger, that's this one. Slow and Easy. Wow, I remember when that was on MTV. Of course, it was not the version I liked, but the track, huge, huge. Spit It Out, okay, it's Coverdale. But then you get to one of my favorite tracks on this album, All or Nothing. And this is just a slug to the face. It's huge and heavy and just glorious. Hungry for Love was great. And then ending with Guilty of Love, a nice fast-paced ender. This is just a really great, great, great record. And I was disappointed because I was to see this tour back in 85, and we drove several hours from campus at college to go see it, and we get there and there's a sign. Of course, there's no internet or anything like that. Mm-hmm. David Coverdale has an abscessed tooth and they won't be playing tonight. And I was like, again, bad timing for Pete, because I wanted to see this tour. And I was like, turned around and drove back because I had no interest to see Grim Reaper. Sorry, I just don't care for Grim Reaper. They were the band that was brought in to substitute for Whitesnake. How those two line up, I have no idea. But they must have had an empty date and could fill it. So oh well. But this is just absolutely gorgeous. Yes. If you're not familiar with the UK version, give it a listen. I'm not saying you'll love it or you'll like it better than the other one, but you need to hear the differences between the two because they are really two different records, folks. The songs may be the same, but that's the only thing that's similar between them. And this is just a real gem. And I listen to this all the time.
And check out the show that Pete and I did, I think a year or two ago. We did a show on Slide It In and compared both mixes. And I think my summation was I like them both. It's more of a hybrid, but
You were nicer than I am.
I do prefer the UK mix. It's a little bit more ballsy on the bottom end. I love the Hodgkinson and Powell bottom end. They're kind of fire.
It breathes more.
Yeah.
It's got life.
Yeah. I think there were a lot of aesthetic decisions, image-wise, that changed that lineup from the UK to the US.
Right.
And the rest is history. But good pick, Pete. Good pick indeed. Still on the theme of David Coverdale, this album continues to go up the rankings. And in fact, I think it's one of those albums, in the day it was maligned because it didn't have Ritchie Blackmore. You know, basically it was a guitarist that was brought into the band that had some substance abuse issues. Live, this band were sort of hit and miss, but the album itself, I think, over time has been reappraised to being one of the top tier Deep Purple albums, and I'm talking about Come Taste the Band with Tommy Bolin.
Yeah,
it's got some wonderful songs. Coming Home, Getting Tighter, Dealer, I Need Love, Ode to G, Love Child. I think this sonically is like the prototype from Whitesnake, or the Whitesnake with David Coverdale. There's a lot of the lyrical themes that he's bringing into it. You hear a lot more confidence in his singing. He's got that machismo, that sort of mancho sort of delivery. There's a lot of conviction. Right. You read the stories about how this album was put together. Glenn Hughes actually flipped out on drugs, and there was sometimes he was missing. There was a lot of chaos. You had the older folk from Deep Purple trying to pull it together, and then you had the Tommy Bolin and Glenn Hughes element that were kind of off the rails. So in a way, it's sort of a miracle that this album ever came out at all.
Right.
I love Tommy Bolin's guitar playing. It's completely different to Ritchie Blackmore. He's a much more colourful, atmospheric type of guitarist. He uses a lot of effect pedals. There is a lot of pitch squeals. He's not flashy in the sense of that neoclassical flash. Look at me, I'm a kind of guitar superstar.
Right.
It's subtle, but it just works so beautifully in the confines of this band for Come Taste the Band. I kind of feel sorry for Tommy Bolin because you look at his career, he comes into a lot of bands at the tail end. The James Gang, he was right at the tail end of them. You know what I mean?
But right at the time, and on a couple of other shows that I've been doing a lot of instrumental stuff. And of course, Billy Cobham's Spectrum comes up that, this was a young Tommy Bolin, and that's what put Tommy on the map.
Yes.
Because his playing with Cobham on that caught everybody's attention. They're like, who in the world is this guy?
Yes.
And deservingly so. When he was right, just a player who could keep up with anybody, and it's just one of those tales of, and I have to think that, as much as maybe is said after the fact from Glenn, and I know that it's sincere, so I'm not trying to be disingenuous. He's like, oh, my poor brother Tommy. And I'm like, well, you were probably enabling him just as much as anybody, Glenn. Now there's two of you.
Yeah.
And for Lord and Pacey and Coverdale, that just had to just be a mess.
The last concert in Japan is an example. Lord's covering it. He's basically like Tommy Bolin could not play because he had he slept on his arm, whether it's a drug-related type of incident, and he could only play chords. So you look at that show, Ian Pace and Lord are basically playing their asses off to lift. It's like they're lifting the whole team and covering the musicology side of things. But what a waste. Such a talent. This is a definite example of potential talent unfulfilled because of a lifestyle. And come taste the band. Look, seriously, guys, this is a magnificent album.
It is
And
very good.
it got maligned in the day, Pete, because it didn't have Blackmore. But over time, I'm telling you, I'm reading lots of reviews, and a lot of people, like in 2024, have realized this is a top tier Deep Purple album.
I got it in real time, and I loved it from the first moment I put the needle on it. I've
Yep.
always loved it.
Yep.
And if you're a drum fan, holy smokes, this era, Ian Pace is just probably his most frantic. He plays like a madman, and the grooves and the fills, and he's just, oh, it's glorious.
Yep.
And he didn't do much of that afterwards, but a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, mate. What's your next one?
Right. Well, we're going with number 4. And this one has, when we did the show on this one, and again, check this one out, I just made it very clear that this one sits kind of right below my top one with this band. We're going with this masterpiece. You know, obviously, we've talked about this forever. Everybody talks about this record, and rightly so. You've got a perfect band, perfect sound, perfect tracks, perfect energy, top to bottom, in, out. Just play it loud and enjoy it, because it's just a spectacular record. And everything about it is good. The drumming is insane. John Lord is off the charts, and Richie is just putting on a masterclass. It's every single thing that anybody talks about Richie is all here. It's all here. It's fire, it's brimstone, it's melodic, it's melody, it's subtlety, it's just fluidity, and then just craziness, and all with a guitar sound that is just, it just seeps right into my DNA, because it's so glorious. And it's just a sound that is just so pleasant. And, you know, like you said, Martin Birch just nailed the crap out of this.
Absolutely.
This is demonstration quality audio on this. And the louder you play it, the better it sounds. And the cover is super cool.
Yes.
And to follow up after losing the members they lost, you know, most bands you could kind of pack it, and, you know, there's been some that have risen out of certain things. Obviously, we'll, you know, Back in Black, we can go there. But to me, this is almost as big a deal. That, you know, granted, we didn't have anybody pass away, so it wasn't on that level. But this is and it's interesting because they call it Burn, because you could almost call it Rise of the Phoenix. You could call it Up from the Ashes, you know, Mr. Doc, and you could call this any number of things, because that's what it did. This was a band that people were like, oh, okay, there's no Gillan, there's no, oh God, what in the world is that? Yeah, this. And it took how many seconds of the opening track for everybody to go, huh? And you're like, okay. This works. And it'll always work. And it'll always be very high on my list.
Yep.
It's an exceptional masterpiece.
50 years, folks. 50 years. Can you believe it? Well, you may.
It's majestic.
You may hear more about it shortly.
Maybe so.
Machine Head, number 4. So this is another album which is it's a masterpiece of the Deep Purple catalog. It's got all the hits: Highway Star, Lazy, Smoke on the Water. I think we've all heard about that song. Space Trucking. The playing on this is just masterly. It's a lot of virtuoso. This is probably the most big-selling Deep Purple album by far. You go to a Deep Purple concert, 3/4 of the tracks are played live since this album came out.
72, right?
when you think about the adversity of the conditions when they were recording in Montreux, in this hotel, in all these different rooms,
in the winter.
yes, to get the right sounds, like Pacey's in a bathroom or something. I don't know 100% for
He's
sure,
in the tiny alcove of a hallway, and they
yes,
put up mattresses to help kind of curtail all of the ambient sound that's going along in the hallways.
I think the sound's very dry. It's a very, and if I say clinical, I don't mean that in a bad sense, but I mean it's just precise. Every note is in the right place. It just sounds good. It sounds kind of almost perfect.
It's almost processed free. Instrument, mic, board.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, yeah. Pete and I, we will do a show this year. Stay tuned, folks, about Deep Purple, Machine Head, and the Zappa remixes. There's been quite a few remixes since this album's come out, so we might do a show. Just stay tuned in 2024 about the maybe compared Zappa with Glover. But look, this is the album in the catalog, Pete, that they're always going to be going back to. It's the proverbial genie's cave. That's if Deep Purple want to, we need to boost up sales. Let's go back to Machine Head. This is going to be the album that they always go back to.
Right.
I love the album cover.
I do too.
It kind of, even though it's hard rock, to me, it's kind of metal. It's kind of makes a statement. Ritchie Blackmore's playing is just outerworldly. His work with John Lord, that neoclassical flourish where they, trade bark on Highway Star, John Lord does a direct lift from some sort of piece from Johann Sebastian Bach, and then Ritchie just gets in and plays a counterpoint. This is where it sounds like they were having fun. Probably not in reality, but it sounds like they were having fun.
If you haven't seen classical albums, The Making of Machine Head, folks, you need to see that. In the bonus tracks, and they're talking about Highway Star, and John gets to that solo section, pre-solo section, and he said, well, I kind of did this classical thing, and he's like showing him, and then he said, well, then the band said, well, what do you really mean, John? So he goes over, turns the beast up, and goes, you're like, with the sound and everything of that Hammond just barking away, and you're like, aha, now we get it. Now it makes sense. Now it sounds like Deep Purple. They're like, off they went. So
absolutely. And I think it's John Lord's classical flourishes that planted the seed into Ritchie that he wanted to go and continue down that neoclassical path of Rainbow. So I know I've said Burn probably planted the seed, but I think you could even go back to Highway Star or those little passages where Lordy's doing the classical.
Well, it was in the extended solo sections, first in something like Ring That Neck, and then later in Space Trucking when they do it for half an hour. Both of them would fire off classical stuff. Lord would throw Dvorak in there. He'd throw everything. He used to add all kinds of stuff in there. And then Ritchie would get to these breakdown sections with his volume and basically play like a cellist.
Yes.
And and you're like, it's all classical music, folks. That's what they were feeling, and that's what they were channeling at mind numbing volume, which could only have been super cool to experience. So
Smoke on the Water, it's been played to death, but it's a compelling song. Like out of some sort of tragedy or some event, you listen to it and it's compelling. It's Ian Gillan at his storytelling best. Ian's lyrics can be kind of lazy
at times, sure,
but when he's on point, he's on point. And I think this is one of his best lyrics. It's observational, and it tells the story and makes it something that you've got to listen all the way through. And Ritchie's solo, it conquered America. This song actually was released as a single and went to number 4 in the US. So it was in the singles charts and produced a lot of signs in guitar stores, Pete. Please don't play Smoke on the Water anymore.
Right. Please don't play Smoke on the Water. And in fact, when Machine Head came out, when Made in Japan came out, both versions of Smoke on the Water were in the charts at the same time. Yeah. The live one and the studio. That doesn't happen very often.
they got the right take. I've heard multiple takes of Smoke on the Water, and he does a different solo for every single.
Yep.
He's got a short attention span now, Richie. He just likes to. He can't seem to do the same thing in every take.
John didn't like to either. You know, Roger Glover kind of referred to him as a Zen archer. It's like one shot, hit the bullseye. He's like, if I don't get it in the first one or two takes, he says, I put it away for a while. He says, because if I hear a bit that I like or something, he goes, now that's copying. That's not improvising. And he doesn't want to copy.
Yep.
So usually those guys, and of course, live, you don't get a shot. And I've never heard them on the dozens and dozens and dozens of bootlegs that I have. I've never heard him go into one and pie anything or just kind of like run out of an idea or something. Oh my God, if anything else, the song's too short because he's got more ideas than he knows what to do with. Yeah. And you're just like, that's what's so glorious about it. You just have no idea where they're going, what's going to come out today. And you're just like, what's next? And I loved his old solo. Oh, wait, now this is my favorite one. And he does something different. And you're like, oh, now I love that one. And you're like, most bands aren't like that.
And his solo is hummable. It's sort of like restrained. He's got a little passage, and I'm sure he's thinking it through, but it's perfect for the song because it's eminently hummable. It's not too busy. Reed Little on a previous show said that those shred guitarists that do 1,000,000 notes per hour, the brain can't simply process those solos. You know, it's flashy and it's kind of memorable, but you can't hum it. But you compare it to something like Blackmore and Smoke on the Water, I can hum it in my head because it's memorable, it's hummable, and it just fits the song so perfectly.
Yeah. I keep hearing that it's his first solo in Lazy. No, and I'm like, there it is. That's a guy walking down the street whistling. And I'm like, that's just so freaking perfect. So cool.
Yeah. Look, it's their most riff-tastic album, I think. So anyway, Machine Head number 4. So we're getting to the top 3. P Business End. What's your number 3?
Number 3, and this one will always stay up here. This was that weird time that you had mentioned just briefly when we were talking about Gillan, the awareness that all of a sudden you were told who joined what, and the world is saying, what in the heck is that going to sound like? It's going to sound like this, folks. And I have talked about this album forever, and I will talk about this album forever. There's nothing I can say bad about this. Okay, I love the cover. Sorry, folks. It's humor, okay? It was done for a reason. And I just think it's funny as heck. It's so heavy. This may still be the heaviest album ever made. You know, do I want it remixed or remastered? I am on the fence with that because as long as I can still go back to this, okay, maybe just to hear somebody else's different interpretation or a redo of it, but I'm afraid you may mess up the brilliantly imperfection of this record. Because it is imperfect. It's wickedly imperfect. The cover, the songs, who's in the band, the misfortunes they had, the crazy Stonehenge stuff. That's Spinal Tap, folks. That's a real story. And all the nonsense that went along with this. He joined them because he was drunk. He didn't even know. His manager says, hey, if you're going to make career decisions, you should let me know. And he goes, what are you talking about, mate? He goes, apparently you just joined Black Sabbath. Oh. Oh. And what do we get? Just trashed, disturbing the priest, Zero the hero. I could just stop right there.
Yeah.
But we get these great songs on side 2. Digital Bitch is just crushing. Born Again. Gillan is just crazy good on this. Hotline, Keep It Warm. Iommi never sounded better. Yeah, the drums are buried, but they pound. And you feel it even if you can't distinguish a single damn note he's playing. I don't care. This is just like walking into a tsunami in front of 1,000 Marshall amps all on 15. And I'm like, good. with Gillan soaring over the top of it. I can't think of a better way to get bludgeoned than like that. I love this freaking album. Absolutely love it.
Top tier, Pete. It's one of my favorite Sabbath albums. I love that to bits, and I haven't got much more to add. I'm obsessed with that album. I really am. I own a couple of copies on vinyl, on CD, and I'm like you. I'm sort of a little bit sort of worried that the remaster is going to clean all the grime and the grit and the edge that it currently has. I like it. Its muffliness, because I think it just adds to the evilness.
Yeah, it does.
Of the whole album. That album has actually inspired a lot of death metal bands. It's inspired a whole genre of music. That Zero the Hero is the most crushing Black Sabbath riff. It's in my top 5 evil Iommi riffs. So well done. You brought it into the
glorious.
We dragged the Sabbath into the Purple family, and it's got some recognition in it. So obviously deserves. All right. Well, I'm going to go with my favorite Whitesnake album. This was the entry point for me. And Pete, you have discussed it because you bookend it with Ready and Willing. And this is 1981. Come and Get It. This is where I think that the classic lineup of Moody, Marsden, Murray, the 3 M's, and Lord and Pace are at the top of their game. I don't think you've ever heard David Coverdale sing better. Like Don't Break My Heart Again, Lonely Days, Lonely Nights. You know, you believe what he's singing. It's just, he's got that raw, that beautiful, rich, bluesy voice. And I just think it's one of the great British blues albums of all time. Hit and Run, Hot Stuff. Pacey's simplifying his drumming, and we've had some discussions about this previous, but he's still got the groove. There's a lot of groove to it. And his approach to the drumming is less is more. And the less is more just really gives a lot of these songs just a lot of click and groove, and they're constantly in the pocket. Child of Babylon's a great song. Till the Day I Die, that's just a wonderful sort of it's kind of like a Stairway to Heaven type of powerful finish to the album. Yeah, there's a lot of tongue-in-cheek lyrics like Girl.
But the groove on Girl is ridiculous.
Oh, absolutely. And Wine, Women and Song, a little bit of a cheeky nod to all the Fleet Street press that were really giving it to him being a sexist oath and all that sort of crap.
Right.
Look, David Coverdale's always been a tongue-in-cheek sort of lyric writer, so he's sort of like his humour's Benny Hill and Monty Python, and it's all in that sort of universe of David Coverdale. But this is the Coverdale album for me. I love the album cover. I love the backdrop. You got all the faces, and that was my entry point. I love it.
Great album.
Come and get it. Number 2 for you.
Number 2, not a surprise that this is up this high. It'll always be up this high. You can do show after show after show about this. We've done our own take on this. 1976, you got Rising. We've talked about this ad nauseum, and again, this is just apex. It's prime Ronnie, prime Richie. Cozy is playing his ass off. The tracks are great. The ones that most people kind of just gloss over are some of my favorites. Terror Woman is spectacular. Run with the Wolf, Starstruck, and yes, Stargazer gets an immense amount of praise, and justifiably so. My prime moment on here is Light in the Black. It's just the same thing they did with Fireball back in the day. This changed everything. It's so unrelenting. Cozy is just, he's a 1,000-car train going downhill with its ass on fire. And it's just bang, bang. And Richie's solo and Tony's solo in that. And Richie just fires off like crazy. And then he just does these beautiful descending lines. And then he harmonizes to himself. right back into the classically influenced, same thing for as in Highway Star. That's all classical music, folks. You practice your etudes, they're right there.
Yep.
Bach and Beethoven, and they're all the geniuses. They already figured it out. Not a bad moment. It's a stunning album. It's a stunning cover. I've already told you the story about it outside my room in college. Go watch the show. You can go see that. It's everything is brilliant about this, and it'll always be brilliant now and forever, always.
Absolutely. And I'm going to do a shout out for a show that you did with Martin Popoff on the Contrarians. It was a fantastic show about drumming. And there was a lot of counterpoints, and the topic of Cozy Powell was brought up. So I'll ask you a question, and pardon me if I'm covering some old territory. Do you think Cozy Powell in Rainbow was probably the best band fit for him in his drumming career?
I think it suits his style the best. It would have been very interesting to hear what he would have done with the debut Rainbow record if the songs were going to stay the way they were composed, because it would have been a little bit restrained for him. And I think it may not have worked so well. But what he does here and what he did on stage and what he does with Long Live, and there are moments on Down to Earth. I don't think it's his best performance. No offense, Martin. But it's a wide open style that allows him to drive and push. He is a forward momentum drummer. He is not a laid back guy. You're never going to confuse him for those studio cats who play 5, milliseconds behind the downbeat. He's a push guy, and he's a flash guy, and he likes to play loud, and he likes to play fast.
Yep.
And I think for Rainbow, that was a perfect fit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of all the bands that he's been in, it just seems like the material is really best suited for him.
Yeah. I saw an interview with Tony Iommi and Tony Martin recently, because they were promoting the new box set, the Tony Martin years. And Iommi was talking about Cozy, and he said that Cozy would actually get a piece of paper and write out the drum riff ahead of laying the beats down for the song. So he wasn't a crash and bash drummer, just sit on the stool and the band play and he works it out as he goes along. He actually would write it down like a classical musician would do.
Yeah. And I think, you bring up Tony, and I'm a massive, massive fan of Headless and Tear. And I think if I was to pick a second place for him that really made him shine and fit in the best, it was that period with Sabbath. Because it suits his style. It's just, and he can play slower, but he just plays with so much space. And you say, well, that's crazy, not because he's so busy. Well, but he plays a different kind of busy. He's kind of a washy guy that just thunders underneath. And, if you've heard any of the live stuff with the Tony Martin, listen to his version of War Pigs. Oh my God. Now, it's not Bill. And Bill is unique, and that's what I was mentioning with Martin. You don't compare somebody with Bill Ward. He's Bill Ward. But Cozy brings a different take to it, and it's so powerful and so menacing, and it makes the whole track just kind of blow your head back. But yeah, those first Rainbow and then his period with Sabbath are my, and of course the Whitesnake one and Slide It In, and not live. I'll draw the distinction. Once Sykes joined the band, I didn't think Cozy was a good fit because they played everything too quickly. The feel was gone. It was all about Sykes. I thought they were sloppy live. I didn't care for that era. Slide It In once John joined the band live. I've heard a lot of live stuff from them, and they're kind of messy.
That Brazil's a bit of a bit of a there's some good moments, but there's some moments where you sort of wince and go, ooh,
There's a Tokyo one. It's just kind of loose.
Yeah.
And they just seem, because Sykes wasn't that kind of player. He wasn't a put it in the pocket kind of guy. And now the other guitarists were gone, and it was just him being Mr. Pyrotech's guy. And don't want to get
Yeah.
on a tangent, but
yeah, I mean, if you're talking about Donington in 1983, the Commandos performance, and you've got Mel Galley and Mick Moody in the band,
yes,
that's where Cozy's really in the pocket and, pushing him along. That's a lot of the Saints and Sinners material. That's where he was really in the pocket and he had some groove. But yeah, I take your point about Sykes, the Tokyo and the Brazil. Brazil's a hot mess. But in front of how many people? It was like 500,000. It's just huge.
It's
Can you imagine the sound? I don't like even Coverdale's a bit pitchy. There's a lot of conjecture that
because Joe Elliott calls him One Take David.
Yeah.
He's just because I think when they were doing one of either Hysteria or one of the other albums, Coverdale was doing something and the other like, oh, Dave's over there. You're like, you want to go watch? And Joe's like, whoa, go watch Mr. One Take. Nail it just because he was that good. He was very seldom to see pitchy.
Yeah. Well, I think he was pitchy because he had issues with the monitor.
He can't hear.
He can't hear himself in front of 500,000 folks. Right. So they love the rock in Brazil, I tell you. They love it. They do indeed. Number 2. Burn. Excellent. Love it. I mean, you summed it up perfectly. The playing is impeccable. And this is a prime example of a band that changed a lead singer and a bass player, which are 2 fundamental positions in a band, and made it seem seamless. I mean, the first blue chip gig was the California Jam in front of 200,000 people. Right. David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes. And you look at them and, David seems a little bit nervous. I mean, he tells everybody that he had a check for $1 million in his back pocket. I'd be nervous too with a $1 million check. But the band, you just listen to his vocals, the tonality, the songwriting, it's all just world class. And Blackmore has got fire in the belly. So, you got this thing. He's like a shark. He keeps on moving and looking for fresh blood and going forward. And, he's got new blood in the band and he seems invigorized. And the playing has a lot of fire in the belly. I think Ian Pace is playing on this album is the best. You Fool No One. We've spoken about this in the Burn show. Right. He was grappling with this all day and he finally nailed it. But oh my God, the playing is just outerworldly. That pattern, that drum pattern.
Pretty cool. It's the beauty of a double paradiddle.
Yeah. I even like A200. I think the Blackmore guitar solo, a lot of people say that's the throwaway, that's the filler track, but it's just searing.
Yeah, so, it is. Look, it's raw and aggressive.
Mistreated, probably an early prototype power ballad. This is the album. Deep Purple Burn. I've always said and copped a bit of flack that this is the best Deep Purple album, and I'll still stick to it. And a lot of people have this album very high up in their estimations. It's an album that has gained a lot of momentum. And if you look at the sales of the Deep Purple catalogue, the sales of this album still tick over, along with Machine Head and all the Mark II. So,
sure.
Burn. All right, Pete, I have a funny feeling that I know what your number 1 album is. So I'm going to write it down on a piece of paper. In rock.
Yep. Yeah. But I'm going to do a very caveat here. This is a 1B because I'm going to take a liberty here. I have a tie for number 1. And you say, what? It's not fair.
We didn't have that in the rules.
You said you can't do that. But you know what? I'm going this is the album for me. And the other one I have to mention up in this because it belongs parallel with this. There's nothing I could say about this that I haven't said a million times. Every track is a masterpiece. The band is at their absolute zenith of creativity and energy and power and veracity. Oh my God, Speed King, you mentioned that. Bloodsucker is crushingly heavy. Child in Time is a masterpiece. Flight of the Rat. Oh, holy smokes. Into the Fire. Living Wreck. And if you think it was all about speed, these guys could groove at any tempo because they got that guy in the back who can play anything. But then it's the track Hard Loving Man that is, to me, is just this whole era, Sabbath, Zeppelin, everything, that is the track for me. Everything about it is perfect. Lord's simple keyboard, that is so easy. It's just just they move down to E so they can play on all open strings and just start flailing away. And you're like, oh, wait, they're in the studio. This is not live. They're in the studio just going crazy. And it just all ties back together. And it just is this glorious masterpiece of insanity. And oh my God. But I have to get to this one. This is 1A or 1A prime. You probably wouldn't have picked this one. I have to talk about this. Of this whole list, this is the most important album of that whole list because this is what started it for me. I have two older sisters, 3 and 6 years older, and rating their record collection was a daily habit for me. I grabbed this sometime in 1970. And when I heard through this, who in God's name, pun intended, is this Jesus guy? And before Child in Time, before I'd heard any of that, I had heard Ian Gillan, who had just joined Purple, but I didn't know that yet, sing Gethsemane. And I thought I had just completely died and gone to heaven. Again, pun intended. I was so floored. And then my next door neighbor, who have 5 boys, the youngest is my age, so all the other boys are older, played hard rock and metal in their house all the time. They played me this. And I went, that's the same guy. And they're like, there it was. And the connection was made, and the skies parted, and life became harmony and perfection. And it started with that. Now, I would have eventually discovered in rock the same way, most likely. But the fact that I had heard Ian ahead of time and didn't know his connection, because I'd obviously heard Hush, but that's not Ian. So I was just like, there it was. And that is, I listened to that multiple times every year since it's come out, without fail. Top to bottom, Murray Head, everybody, Tracy, Yvonne Elliman, masterpiece.
I think Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice were absolutely inspired to get Ian Gillan as Jesus Christ in that show, or on the soundtrack, because to
he
me,
didn't do the show. So
no, he didn't. But to me, he is the voice of that show, and that went to #1 in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
That show was phenomenally popular in the 70s. They did a revival with John Farnham in the 90s. But it's a show that keeps on coming back. Yeah. But to me, Gillan is the voice of that show. And I think it was completely inspired, and his voice was just so pure, and he was just made for that type of...
Once I got a taste of the tonality, the delivery of his voice, it was never going to leave my ears again.
Yep.
And it never has.
I think that the Concerto and Jesus Christ Superstar, getting them in the press in the UK fed into the popularity of In Rock, and how that went to #3 and was in the charts for like 52 weeks. So I think all of those projects fed into each other and definitely pushed Deep Purple right at the top, because Deep Purple they were more well known in America for Mark One than they were in their homeland.
Right.
Hush didn't really set the
No,
world
he
on
was
fire
big in the
in
US.
the UK. So it was Ian Gillan joining the band with Roger Glover, and those three projects that really projected them to the top of the pile. So, but oh man, that is an inspired pick, Pete. Wonderful, wonderful. I didn't even think about that. And that's why I love these shows. Something completely out of the box. Rising. That's my number one. Love it. I love it. It's just the majesty of rock. I think side two, Stargazer, Light in the Black, is my favorite side in the vinyl age of rock. Can't beat it. I used to put the headphones on, have it on the turntable, and before I go to bed, and lights are off, and just listen to it.
Mm.
Posey used to say, "Oh, Richie, he didn't like playing Stargazer and A Light in the Black live, one after the other, because he reckoned he was knackered. He was
And
stuffed."
Still I'm Sad.
Yeah, he protested a lot, but Starstruck. I don't think there's any dud tracks. I mean, there is this narrative that there is a bit of filler tracks on side one, but I like them. Do You Close Your Eyes, Run with the Wolf. There's not that many tracks on this album, but
No.
every track's in the right place. It's a great song list, and it's economical. It gets to the point, and it's wonderful. It invented power metal, neoclassical metal.
Yep.
Randy Rhoads, a lot of the Yngwie Malmsteen, Rising. There's a connection. It's an album that's inspired so much out of the heavy metal genre, and I just think it's just a wonderful album. So there you go,
Absolutely.
my number one pick. I love it.
Can I fire off a real couple quick honorables here?
Please.
All right. Well, for people who are looking at my list going, my God, Peter, what is wrong with you? You're missing something very prime. This sits at 11. And the reason I can do that is I'm such a fan of Made in Japan that most of these tracks, I go to that to listen to. Obviously, I love Maybe I'm a Leo, Pictures of Home, and Never Before. I love those. But all the other tracks, I'm going to Made in Japan. So that kind of substitutes, for that one. So this is never too far removed. So those of you who are keeping track going, oh, hey, Mr. Purple, you don't have Machine Head. It's right at 11. Another great family one. This is 1982, John Lord's Before I Forget. If you're not familiar with this, folks, you need to go find this. This is a really great album. Ian Pace, Neil Murray, Bernie Marsden, Cozy Powell, Simon Kirke, Boz Burrell, Tony Ashton, Mick Ralph, Simon Phillips. You can just Elmar Gantry on vocals. You can just go from track to track. There's classical stuff. There's good, simple rock and roll stuff. Great, great keyboard playing, obviously, from Mr. Lord. The recording is absolutely stunning. The real big track on here is Bach onto this. Simon Phillips, Neil Murray, and John Lord. It's an instrumental, and it is wickedly entertaining. I had to include this because if Mr. Glover is not included with this beautiful butterfly ball and the grasshopper's feast, again, if you're not familiar with this, this is 1974, 75 in the U.S. Glenn Hughes, Glover, Dio, Mickey Soleil from Elf, Coverdale, Tony Ashton, John Lawton is on here. It's a little story. It's like an Alice in Wonderland kind of story where little songs create snippets or characters, and it goes, and a lot of these are short, minute and a half, 2.5 minutes. But the real standouts are the longer tracks. Ronnie sings Sitting in a Dream, which is just glorious. and Love Is All, Homeward he ends. It just, what a perfect ending to the album. Ronnie sings so gently and lullaby like. Oh, this is a great album. And then the last one, I gotta get Mr. Jolin Turner in here because I love this freaking album. It's the only Malmsteen record I can listen to top to bottom. It's the only one. I did it with the first album when it came out, but I can't do it anymore. It's too painful. This is fun. Great singing from Jolin, and I think he's really in his wheelhouse here. Heaven Tonight, Deja Vu, Crystal Ball, even the opening track, Rising Force. It's aggressive, it's heavy. Malmsteen still has his flirty moments, but there's a crap load of melody and a lot of really good singing and a lot more accessible stuff on this. And it's not surprising that this was the most popular of his careers. Shocker, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's my
Singer.
favorite. It's my favorite Yngwie Malmsteen album, easily. Of it. A couple of honorable mentions. Slide It In. That was just on the cusp of top 10. UK version and a little bit of US, so maybe a hybrid. I like that album a lot. Gillan, I'll do another shout out. Glory Road. Love that album. Again, it's got a lot of the rambunctious, punkish, let's put on a show type of feel of a lot of the what the Gillan band was famous for. So Glory Road, Bernie Tormé on guitars, and Born Again, Black Sabbath, definitely. That's right on the cusp of the top 10. But mate, what an epic. I think we put it together a pretty solid list. And look, this is our picks. It's our personal opinion. A lot of it doesn't go with the conventional critical. This is what the top 10 should be, but it's just our opinion, and that's all it is, where we are. So please check out Peter Jones on the Contrarians. Type in Pete Jones, and he's on a lot of other wonderful channels. Please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. Tell us what your favorite Purple and Purple Family albums are, top 10. Pete and I really enjoy reading the comments, and from time to time I go, oh, why didn't I think of that one? There's always surprises, but I really enjoy reading the comments and getting your opinion as to what the top tier Purple albums. Our next show is I'm getting Pete and Reed Little from the Contrarians on. We are going to do a show deconstructing Phenomena, which is one of the albums that I did in my top 10 that featured the vocals of Glenn Hughes. So it's going to be a little bit of a new one for you, Pete, which is great because I really appreciate having an appraisal with a fresh pair of ears. And we're going to talk about that album and, whether you like it or you don't. And just commentary around that. So,
exciting.
All right. So thank you, Pete. One thing's for sure, you'll see me and Pete doing more shows on the Deep Purple family. Check you later and have a good week. Cheers.
Bye-bye.